Hey everyone, it is time for the second dynasty of China that I wanted to teach you about. This one is called the Zhou Dynasty. Last week I taught you about the Shang Dynasty, and this week I'm going to teach you about the Zhou Dynasty. It does look like it's pronounced Zhao, but it's actually pronounced Zhou, like someone's name Zhou. So the basics here. It began in about 1045 BCE and it ended in about 256 BCE. So if you remember the Shang Dynasty, that lasted about 700 years. This one's actually the longest lasting dynasty. It lasted nearly 800 years. Although when we talked about dynasties last week, it's a lot about one family controlling, and that is the case here, but there's also a lot of other people that are trying to take power at the time. A lot of different fights and battles going on that I'm going to explain here in a litlittle bit. But the dynasty that they're going to classify in history is the Zhou Dynasty is going to last about 800 years. It began when the Zhou Dynasty overthrew the Shang Dynasty back in around 1045 BCE, and they kind of claimed that they were given power through the mandate of heaven. And what that really means is that the Zhou Dynasty basically claimed that heaven and God sent them the power to rule, and because of that, they had the authority to rule over China. So that's pretty much what the mandate of heaven means there. So this is kind of where the Zhou Dynasty would have taken place, mostly right near the rivers and kind of next to the Yellow Sea and the East China Sea. Up here we have the Yellow River that I taught you about last week, and then down here I have the Yangtze River that I also taught you about last week. So in that general region of Inner China is where this Zhou Dynasty is going to take place. The green border is going to be where China is at today, but remember ancient China is going to be smaller. In the Zhou Dynasty, they were mostly ruling out of feudalism, which is kind of another type of government. Basically, it's a government based on who owns the land. So kind of the first thing to know is that the king owns all the land. So whoever the king was of the Zhou Dynasty at the time, they technically had ownership over all of the land, but they did start divvying up some parts of big pieces of land to some lords. Lords are basically people that were very loyal to the king, and because the king was giving them some land, the lord in return, or the lords in return, would then supply the kings with a lot of military and weapons and things so that the king can stay strong and to make sure that no one could kind of go against the king. And then the lords would have different peasants, and then those peasants are loyal to the lords, and the lords are loyal to the king. So you can kind of see how it all works. And the peasants obviously were farming and getting a lot of crops. So in return for protection from the king and the lords, the peasants would then pay the lords with crops and other different resources that they were farming or harvesting at the time. And then the fighting starts. So feudalism happens for a long time, and then people start kind of going a little bit nuts. So instead of following one king, a lot of these lords start to get a little power hungry, and then the warring states period starts. So they kind of start separating from each other. They all start wanting more power, so they start fighting. So if you think about this being a lord and this being a lord and maybe someone over here, they're all wanting power. They all want to be the best. They all want to be the ruler. So they all kind of start fighting. So technically, the Zhou Dynasty is still happening, but there's also a lot of different disruption that's happening within the Zhou Dynasty at the time. So through all these fights and through all these different people wanting power, there was a lot of different ways that people wanted power. And there's a lot of different things that people did to try to say that their power was the best way to rule. So the big question when we talk about the Zhou Dynasty is, what is the best way to rule China? And there's really three major philosophies that the different Chinese leaders were taking at the time to claim how the best way to rule was. And if you're wondering what is a philosophy, that's basically just a way of thinking. So I might have a philosophy of how I should teach you during this remote learning, but another teacher might have a different philosophy or way of thinking of how they think the best way to teach it. So just like that with ruling and in ancient China, these different leaders had different philosophies or ways of thinking of how they think they should rule over China. So the three philosophies that I'm going to get to in just a second, the first one you see is Confucianism. The second philosophy is Taoism, and the third philosophy is legalism. And if you look at these little pictures that go with them, it kind of shows you in a nutshell what these philosophies were like. So if you see here, we see some type of teacher, and then this person paying respect to their teacher. Here we see a man sitting under a tree. It looks very peaceful, and that's going to have a lot to do with Taoism and their philosophy. And then in legalism here, doesn't look like it's super positive and happy. You see a leader here striking someone down that maybe be disobeying. So this one's a little bit harsher. So let's start with Confucianism, which you'll see again here in the top. So in Confucianism, it pretty much means lead by example. One guy named Confucius, you can look up a lot of different quotes that he said. He was all about leading by example and providing a little bit more of a fair way to rule as the leader. So in Confucianism, some of the things they believe in governing wisely. So we should have a nice, clear plan to how we should organize society. It should be honest and fair. You should always respect your elders, but then on the other half of that, your elders should also respect you. So it's kind of like the treat others how you want to be treated type of philosophy. And if you rule well, then and your citizens respect you and you respect them, then things will be a little bit easier to accomplish. And then they also just believed in proper behavior, so that you should be following the leader's instructions, because if they're governing wisely and they're honest and fair, then that is the right way to kind of lead. A second philosophy, you can kind of see here, I know I'm blocking a little bit, but you might have recognized the symbol called yin and yang. And when you look at the Taoism symbol, that one obviously represents a little bit more peace. And kind of the philosophy with Taoism, the way of thinking here is if you must rule, rule as little as possible. So they do not believe in strong leadership. They believe in a peaceful way of living, and that rulers shouldn't have too much power over people. People should be able to make their own decisions. So with Taoism, they believe in living in harmony with one another, respecting others, but then letting kind of people do their own thing instead of having all of these different rules and regulations cast down upon you. They believe in being one with nature and respecting nature, which is kind of why you see the tree up here, as just kind of being able to involve yourself in nature. And then inside of nature, they believe that there's a lot of opposites that exist, light and dark, and black and white, and all these different types of contrast that they believe should be in balance with each other. So all of these opposites should balance out, which is why you probably have seen this symbol before, the yin and yang, basically meaning both sides, those opposites should be in balance. So if you believe in Taoism, that means you believe in not a whole lot of strong leadership at the top, but everybody just kind of living peacefully with one another. And then the last philosophy is called legalism. This one's definitely the strictest out of the three. Legalism basically means lead with force. I kind of like to think about this as more of like a dictatorship, where if you don't get your way, you're just going to punish people until you get your way. So with legalism, they believe that people are naturally selfish. So because people are naturally selfish, they're not going to be able to just lead themselves like the Taoists thought in the last slide. So they believe that you need to have clear laws. You need to have strict punishments for people that if they don't follow the laws, they need to know exactly what's going to happen to them as a punishment. And then they kind of believe in this quote, he who trusts others will be controlled by others. So they shouldn't let people trust, you shouldn't let you trust your citizens. They should believe the ruler should have full power. You should follow the leader's instructions. And if you let other people just kind of govern themselves, then they're not going to be able to have a successful society. So you need to do it for them. So this one's definitely the strictest out of the three, and is kind of going to be the inspiration for the dynasty that's about to take over. So with the Zhou Dynasty, you see all these different philosophies and different rulers throughout the time of the dynasty. But then the Qin Dynasty is eventually going to seize control over China. And they kind of seize control over China because of legalism. So with this philosophy in mind, Emperor Qin, who we're going to learn about in the next video that I'm going to post about the Qin Dynasty, was reading a lot about legalism and how you should have strict control and how you should force people to follow your behaviors. So he kind of uses that as inspiration and takes control over the Zhou Dynasty, and then starts the Qin Dynasty. So that is how the Zhou Dynasty ended.